A good vach, Shavua Tov, a good week. How are you, my holy sisters and brothers? We are going to get this week off with a spectacular story that I heard at Shabbos lunch today. Let's light up the darkness. Oops. All right, who is with us as we get it going? A new week on a Saturday night. Paula in Chicago, Lisa Beth, Melissa in Great Neck, Tom Beck saying Shavua Tov. Sharon in New Jersey, Paula in the Great Northwest, John in Maine, Patrice says hello, Rochelle in Modesto, Ari in Atlanta, Lisa Beth. I am sharing on my group Lisa's Italian Jewish Kitchen. Come and join me. Beautiful. Arnold Albin in Northridge, Brenna in Massachusetts, Nicholas in Portland, Oregon. Okay, we are gathered. I know it's very late on the East Coast. I anticipate that tonight's show is going to be a short one. So if you have comments or questions, get them in early. I just wanted to share this terrific story. We've talked about in the past that when you leave this world, right, meaning when you are a soul, right, you don't have a soul, you are a soul. When you leave this world and you return to the world of souls, you'll be asked certain questions, right? Among them, did you set regular times for Torah study? So if you're learning with us, you can say yes, well done. Another one is, were you honest in your business dealings? And specifically that's, were you honest when nobody was looking, right? Those little transactions that you could do, that you could just get away with because presumably nobody is looking. If you're honest in those moments, why? Why are you doing it? It's because you have awe of Hashem, you're a God-fearing person, you know you have eternal values, you subscribe to these eternal values, and you're honest when it matters to no one but you and the Holy One. Well, today I heard an amazing story about this. So this was the well-known Rabbi Kaminetsky, and he went back to visit the old country. And I only heard this once, so I'm just doing my best with the details. But his father came from a little town in Lithuania where he was the rabbi of the town, right? So I believe that was Rabbi Yaakov Kaminetsky. And so the son, when he happened to be traveling in Europe, decades later after his father was there, he was a survivor of the Holocaust in Lithuania, eventually made his way to America. So the son was visiting the old country decades later, I don't know, maybe in the 70s or 80s, something like that. And while he was there, he heard the following story about his father. The postmaster of this small town liked to play a little game with the customers. He would purposefully, when they bought stamps at the post office, he would purposefully give them a little bit more change than they were due, right? So they would, I don't know, let's say they bought 29 cents of stamps and they paid with $1. Obviously, it was different kinds of money in Lithuania, but let's say they paid with $1. And instead of giving them the 71 cents change, he gave them 74 cents change. And then he liked to observe who would count their change and say, you gave me too much, and return the extra change. And one thing that he noticed was that when he played this game, that pretty much all the townspeople would take the change. They would just take the change. But this one guy in the town, the rabbi, of the Jewish community, he would always give the change back. Right? The first time he did it, he thought, well, maybe it's just a freak thing. He's feeling honest today. So the postmaster did this a bunch of times, and invariably, the elder Rabbi Kaminetsky returned the extra change. That was when he was young, and just a young rabbi in town, maybe in the 1920s. So by the time they get to the 1940s, 40s, right? And the Holocaust is happening. The man who had been working in the post office had become the mayor of the town. And whenever he heard about that the Nazis were gathering up or the anti-Semites were gathering up the Jews to kill them, he would warn the Jews of that town, and they would go into hiding. And the result was that all of the Jews in that town survived because of the honesty of this young man that would always be sure to return any extra change that he was given. That postmaster was impressed by that. And he said, that must apply to the whole Jewish community. And I think it did. I think the rabbi kind of let it be known that was an important lesson. And so everyone that was part of his community acted the same way. And so the postmaster was so impressed with that that he felt, a connection, a care for the Jewish community. And when he was in a position to know when danger was coming for the Jews of his town, he warned them and they survived. So the younger Rabbi Kaminetsky, he heard this story when he went back to visit, right, many years later, just to see the town where his father grew up. When he returned to the United States, he asked his father, he wanted to know if his father, realized that this had happened. And so he said to his father, were you aware that there was something going on between you and the postmaster with regard to getting change for stamps that actually had a very serious good effect on the Jews of that town? And the father said, no, I had no idea something was going on. My only memory was that the postmaster couldn't count very well. This is a true story, right? So the elder Rabbi Kaminetsky, he didn't realize he was being tested. He didn't know that it mattered. He didn't know that this was going to have an effect that would just spiral bigger and bigger in a positive way and save all those lives. It was simply his habit to be scrupulously honest. Generally, no one cares or notices if you're being scrupulously honest in these little matters of pennies. But in that case, it turned out that somebody was looking, and it ended up saving lives. What an amazing story. Okay, where are we holding? We are now coming to the end of chapter 2 here in Tractate Yoma, the 6th volume of the Talmud, the laws of Yom Kippur. We have generally been working our way through sort of chronologically the way that Yom Kippur was observed when the temple was standing. So the first chapter was all about the sequestering of the high priest in the temple compound for 7 days prior to Yom Kippur, both to keep him away from sources of impurity that would disqualify his service on the day of Yom Kippur, and to prepare him emotionally, spiritually, mentally for his encounter with the divine when he would enter the Holy of Holies on Yom Kippur. And also we learned that he got very familiarized with all of the duties that are normally carried out by the other priests, not the high priest, the daily offerings that are brought, because on Yom Kippur, he would have to do those himself. And that's what chapter 2 has generally been about, is the normal workings of the temple with respect to the lotteries and the service, the avodah, the service that the priest carried out in the temple every day. Today we're covering the 5th Mishna here of chapter 2, the 5th and final Mishna of chapter 2. It gets pretty technical, so we're going to read the Mishnah and then just like a good little chunk of how they prove what's going on in the Mishnah, and then that's it. It's not. We're not going to do the whole page. It's not sort of within what we do in this class. So as I said, today's going to be a relatively short class. If you've got comments or questions on the Rabbi Kaminetsky story or what I cover now, get them in. Okay. 5th Mishnah, chapter 2. We're at the bottom of the B side of page 26, but today's daf is page 27, Chaf Zayin. Okay, the Mishnah. A ram that is brought for a communal burnt offering right? So there were different animals that could be brought. It could be a ram, it could be a ewe, it could be a young ram or ewe, meaning a lamb. It could be a goat, it could be a bull, depending on various different kinds of offerings. So today we're talking about a ram brought as a communal burnt offering. So an elevation offering is going to be entirely consumed by the altar. But as we've seen, once that animal was slaughtered, it was cut up in specific pieces that are brought up by different priests. It takes multiple priests to conduct the communal service each day. Again, this hasn't been done in 2,000 years since the temple was destroyed. A ram that is brought for a communal burnt offering is sacrificed by 11 priests. The flesh on the various limbs is taken by 5 priests, as in the case of the sheep of the daily offering. The intestines and the fine flour of the meal offering and the wine of the libation are carried by 2 priests each, because the meal offering and the wine libation that accompany a ram are larger than those that accompany a sheep. A bull is sacrificed by 24 priests. How so? The head and the right leg are sacrificed first, but due to its size, the head is carried by 1 priest and the leg by 2. The tail and the left leg are carried as follows. The tail is sacrificed by 2 and the leg by 2. The breast and the neck are carried as follows. The breast by 1 and the neck by 3 priests. The 2 forelegs are carried by 2 priests, and the 2 flanks are carried by 2. The intestines and the fine flour and the wine are carried by 3 each, because the meal offering, the wine libation that accompany a bull are larger than those that accompany a ram. You can imagine when you're bringing a bull, right? That's a very large animal, and to get all of its various parts up the ramp to the altar and onto the altar pyre required all of these priests assisting. In what case is this statement said? That this is the sequence followed. It is in the case of communal offerings. However, in the case of an individual offering brought to fulfill a vow or an obligation, so a person might have made a vow, a voluntary vow to bring an offering, and then he has to fulfill it because he made a vow, or it might be an obligatory offering because he's gone through some kind of a purification ritual that requires an offering at the end, or he was a Nazir, or he was a Mitzorah. As we've seen, people who took the vow of Naziris to not drink wine or cut their hair at the end of the period of time, they have to bring certain offerings, or the Mitzorah, the one who had tzara'as, the skin malady that came from a spiritual condition, they would have to bring offerings at the end. So those would be... Sorry, I don't know what that sound is. I hope it goes away. Come on. I think it's some kind of a battery. Ugh. Okay. Sorry. Right. I totally lost my train of thought. But anyway, those would be private offerings. And for a private offering, they would not need all this array of priests bringing the various parts up the ramp to the altar. However, in the case of an individual offering brought to fulfill a vow or an obligation, if a single priest wishes to sacrifice it alone, he may sacrifice it alone, or if he chooses, he may include other priests in the service. Presumably, he could do it alone with a lamb. He's not going to be able to do that with a bull. With regard to the flaying and the cutting of both these individual offerings and those communal offerings, they are equal, as will be explained in the Gemara. That's the Mishnah. Gemara. A sage taught in the Tosefta, the individual offerings and communal offerings are equal with regard to their flaying and cutting, in that these may be performed by a non-priest. They are not considered services that require priests, right? So we had a long discussion about which aspects of the temple service, if it was done by a non-priest, would result in a penalty of charis, right? That's excision, death at the hands of the heavenly court. if a non-priest got involved in doing something that only a priest should do. So here what they're discussing, let me just make an adjustment on my screen. This happens from time to time. Come on. Okay. Here we go. Sorry about that. So now what they're discussing is with respect to this part of the process. They would slaughter the animal. That could be done by a non-priest. Then a priest had to receive some of the blood that came out of the slaughtering when they would cut the neck in a very, ritually specific way. They would collect that blood, then take it up on the altar, sprinkle some of that blood on the altar, and that's really what brings the atonement for the community bringing that offering or for the individual bringing the offering. It's that sprinkling of the blood, of the lifeblood of the animal on the altar that brings the atonement, and then you would still have to do the other parts of the procedure, like if it was an elevation offering, bringing the limbs onto the altar where they would burn up. Or if it was a peace offering, there was just small parts that would go up on the altar. The rest could be taken away and would be eaten by the person bringing the offering and their friends and family. So the question that's being brought here is, okay, after they slaughter the animal, the skin is taken off. I think even for elevation offerings, they take off the skin, and those are sort of a perk of the priests. So that's the flaying, and then there's the cutting, where the butchering, where they would just cut up the pieces. And so the question is, may the flaying and the cutting be performed by a non-priest, because it's not an essential part of the service, and it could be done just like the slaughtering could be done by a non-priest. Could that part of the process be done by a non-priest? Chizkiah said, from where is it derived that they are equal with regard to their flaying and cutting? Meaning, from where is it derived that flaying and cutting of offerings, whether individual or communal, may be performed by a non-priest? At first it is stated with regard to the burnt offering, Leviticus 1:6, and he shall flay the burnt offering and cut it into its pieces. And following that, it is stated, the next verse, Leviticus 1:7, the sons of Aaron the priest shall place fire on the altar. The fact that the sons of Aaron, that's the priesthood, the descendants of Aaron, Moses' brother, he was the first high priest, and it's only his sons, all his descendants that are priests, that are Kohanim. The fact that the sons of Aaron are mentioned in the verse about putting fire on the altar, but not in the verse about flaying and cutting, teaches that placing fire on the altar requires priesthood, meaning only a priest can place the fire on the altar, but flaying and cutting do not require priesthood. The Gemara asks, but that verse about putting fire on the altar is needed for its own sake, to teach that the wood must be brought by a priest. It should not be interpreted as an inference that other services, such as flaying and cutting, may be performed by non-priests. Rav Shimi bar Ashi said, I found Abaye explaining Chizkiah's derivation to his son, based on the following Baraisa. It is written, and he shall slaughter the bull before the Lord. That's Leviticus 1:5. With no mention of a priest, which teaches that slaughter by a non-priest is acceptable, and that is the law. The Baraisa continues, now, from where would you come to think otherwise? Why would one even suspect that a priest should be required to slaughter the offering so that a specific verse is required to tell us otherwise? From the fact that it is stated, and you and your sons with you shall keep your priesthood. That's Numbers 18:7. I would derive that no part of the sacrificial service may be performed by a non-priest, not even the slaughtering. So we have good reason to think that every aspect of bringing an animal offering when the temple is standing has to be done by the priest. So now why do I need a special verse to tell me, or how do I learn from this verse that a non-priest can do the slaughtering? Well, the Baraisa continues, therefore the verse states, and he shall slaughter the bull before the Lord, and the sons of Aaron shall sacrifice the blood. That's Leviticus 1:5. And from here it is inferred that from the sacrificing of the blood, which begins with the collection of the blood and onward, It is a mitzvah, a commandment exclusively of the priesthood. But from before the collecting of the blood and bringing it to the altar, etc., that doesn't require a priest. Just prior to this, the Torah states in Leviticus 1, 4, and 5, and he shall place his hands upon the head of the burnt offering, and he shall slaughter the bull before the Lord. In this verse, the Torah is referring to the donor of the offering, the one who actually brought the animal to the temple. The donor of the offering, when it says he shall place his hands, it's done like this. This is called semicha, when you place hands on the offering, when it's still alive. In this verse, the Torah is referring to the donor of the offering when it says he shall place his hands. And therefore, when it continues, and he shall slaughter, it is still referring to the donor. And the Torah thereby taught that the slaughter of the offering is acceptable if it is performed by a non-priest. So that's how the sages derived that a non-priest could actually do the slaughter. And it's explicitly in the Torah that from receiving the blood and onward in the offering process, that must be done by the priest. And that leaves our question open. The flaying and cutting of the animal, can that be done by a non-priest or must it be done by a priest? Abaye and Hizkiah says it may be done by the non-priest. Abaye asked, since, as this baraisa establishes, from the collection of the blood and onward is a mitzvah exclusively of priesthood, why do I need the Torah to say afterward, the sons of Aaron shall put fire on the altar? Since the verse about putting the fire on the altar follows the verse about collecting its blood, it is clear that it must be done by priests, and the verse's stipulation of this fact appears superfluous. Since we've already established that from the collecting the blood onward has to be done by priests, why does the Torah think to mention that placing the fire on the altar has to be done by priests? We know that has to be done by priests. So the fact that there's a superfluous specification that a part of the procedure must be done by the priest, after we already know it must be done by the priest, it must be there to teach us something. What? This is why Hizkiah concluded that the verse is not required for its own sake, but rather is needed to teach the following inference. It is only the placing of fire on the altar that requires priests, to the exclusion of flaying and cutting up the animal, which may be performed by a non-priest. And the halacha, the law, is flaying and cutting by a non-priest. The flaying and cutting of offerings may be performed by non-priests. The rest of our daf until the end of the chapter sort of tests this contention, whether we really can hold that way or not. So I gave you the basics of how they derived it and the fact that that is the halacha, that's where they came out. So if you want to go into greater detail about how they prove that the flaying and cutting may be performed by a non-priest, and if he does so, he does not receive the kares penalty, you can look on the rest of this page. Now, I think Nina had to drive my son to an event with his friends, so I will just double check if she listed any questions, and if not, I will scan for your questions. And yes, that is the situation. So let me check. Okay. Welcome to Miro from Ethiopia. Welcome, Lynn, in North Texas. Okay. Lisa Beth Rosenberg says, according to Facebook, I'm your biggest fan. LOL. So glad to have you here. And everybody, if you're learning Torah late on a Saturday night, you've got your week started off in the right way. Well done. Nicholas loves honesty. Yosef just received my I Don't Roll on Shabbos t-shirt. Loving it. We've got a lot of really fun conversation-starting t-shirts in the AT store. Just check it out, shop.accidentaltalmudist.org. I should have mentioned at the top, we're in a campaign right now to try to increase our number of monthly donors. That really helps our nonprofit have a kind of regular stream that we can rely on for all of our expenses. So go to donate.accidentaltalmudist.org. A bunch of people have stepped up in the last few days. Any amount is great, but the fact that it's regular and that it comes in once a month is so beautiful for our organization. And it's a tremendous merit for you to enable us to share Torah with the world. You participate in that. That is the kind of money you can take with you when you leave this world. Remember, it doesn't just have to be us, but any money you give to charity, you take it with you when you leave this world. And our organization is a Torah education organization, so that's very impactful. And we really, really appreciate and welcome monthly donors. If you commit to $18 a month or more, you can dedicate an episode of AT Daily to the honor or the healing or the memory of a loved one. Okay. Lisa Beth says, beautiful story about the Rabbi Kaminetsky story. I have some similar about my grandmother in Italy. It was recorded. Also, by the way, I'm going away tomorrow morning. I'm going to go visit my parents. I'm going to be back with God's help on Thursday. So I won't be teaching this class until I return on Thursday. On that day, I'll do a highlights of the pages that were missed. So we'll do, just sort of the best parts of the 5 pages, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, the day I return. But this show, in the regular slot, Sunday night and Monday night at 6 p.m. Pacific, Nina will be teaching her Chofetz Chaim class, which is going to be great. There's a question whether it's going to be on YouTube or not. So, if possible, tune in on Facebook. She'll definitely be on Facebook, probably on YouTube, not sure. That's a little bit of a technical challenge, but for sure on Facebook, with God's help. So, if possible, tune in on Facebook, 6 p.m. She'll share it into the Accidental Talmudist forum, so you'll be apprised that it's on. Okay, where am I? Bill, is there any insight into how you would get 3 priests around the neck of the bull? As I read it out loud tonight, I'm like, what do you need? But I'm guessing that the neck of the bull is not like if you put a collar on a bull, it would not be only the place where the collar sits. Probably it involves, I don't know, maybe the shoulders as well. I bet it's a big and hefty piece of meat, right? That would be my guess. But Bill says, grew up in cattle country and all this makes sense to me, except that. Was one under it and one on each side or something? I can't answer the question. I'm just speculating. The trials and tribulations of technology. I'm sorry what that beeping was. I don't know what that was. But it seems like it's just that old, uniform power supply told me that probably the battery inside needs to get changed. Okay, anyway. Sharon, if done by a priest or non-priest, was the slaughterer a shachet? Oh, what a good question. So a shachet is somebody who is trained specifically in the laws of shechting, so of ritual slaughter, so that it's done in a kosher manner. So you need a shachet to slaughter any meat that's going to be eaten by a Jew. It has to be slaughtered in a very particular way, and it takes a lot of training. So I'm guessing, Sharon, I don't know the answer for sure, but I'm guessing it has to be a kosher slaughter, right? And the only way to ensure that is if the person is trained in doing it. I suspect that in terms of these laws, it would be that, well, if it's a qualified slaughter, it's a qualified slaughter. Generally speaking, they didn't let non-priests do this. It's just that if they did, it wouldn't be disqualified. And it would seem to me that it's not about the training that the person has. It's about whether it was a kosher slaughter or not. But I'm not sure. Janice, thanks, Sal and Nina, for your dedication to this class. Shavua Tov, safe travels, Sal. Looking forward to Nina's teaching. Thank you so much, Janice. I appreciate that. Lindsay, oh yes, I'm going to set up the monthly donation tomorrow. Thank you so much, Lindsay. We appreciate that commitment tremendously. And to everybody who's already set up that monthly donation. It's a big deal for our organization. Melissa, have a good trip. Looking forward to Nina's class. Happy Mother's Day. PK will be joining Nina. That's it. Everybody, wishing you, if you're a mom, a very happy Mother's Day. If you have a mom, may she have a very happy Mother's Day. If your mom has left the world, Honor her on Mother's Day. Tell a story in her name. Recollect something that your mom did for you and share that with people in your life. I'm sure that would give nachas to your mom in the next world. And if your mom is still alive, do the same thing, right? And any time that we give over teachings that we learned, the wisdom of our moms, right? It's a beautiful thing to do, to share the wisdom of our moms on Mother's Day. Have a terrific night and a great week. And with God's help, we'll be together again on Thursday. All the best.